Thank you for watching. My name is Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Governed. Today we're going to be talking about failing up and how government tends to reward the most incompetent. All right, we're back to Washington State, and today's show I want to talk about basically what I believe should become a series that we do, and I'm titling this series Failing Up, a government success story, or at least this is how government appears to measure success. And I think this is an important series. I hope that you'll enjoy seeing what we have to say today. And the first featured person that we're going to talk about in this series is a local bureaucrat out of Washington State who's had national prominence, and her name is Suzi Levine. And she's going to be our first example of failing up in government bureaucracy. And I think that this is going to be kind of a classic story. And it's important to talk about Suzi Levine because she's very politically tied in to the establishment in Washington State. She was a big friend and campaign donor to Governor Inslee. And more importantly than that, she was just a big campaign donor in general. She's a mega campaign bundler who has put together massive amounts of money, including millions of dollars, for the Obama administration when he was running for office. And she was able to leverage this ability to raise a lot of money, including her own, into an appointment as an ambassador to Switzerland and to Liechtenstein. So she's been able to do quite well with that. And after the Obama administration came to an end, she came back to Washington State, and Governor Inslee, rewarding her for the many checks that came not just from her, but from her friends, and the money that she's been able to raise for his re-election campaigns over the years, and appointed her as the commissioner for the Washington Employment Security Department. And he did this in 2018, and that was a big position that she wanted, apparently, and that's oftentimes it's not unusual to have commissioners or directors of these departments to be appointed as political appointments by the governor. He's certainly in his authority to do that as the executive for Washington State, and it's not uncommon to have people with this kind of political background or fundraising background be put in this position. And that's why Suzi Levine was appointed there. However, the Employment Security Department really made national news earlier in 2020, just as the pandemic was kicking in and large numbers of people were being laid off, forcibly laid off from all their jobs as the government was shutting down businesses all over Washington State. And this was happening around the country, and Washington State very specifically really was the first one kicking in some very aggressive shutdowns and laying all these people off, saying, hey, listen, you're going to get unemployment. Unfortunately, the Unemployment Security Department, which Suzi Levine was the head of, unfortunately lost, apparently, in the beginning, we were looking at about $1 billion that was lost to a Nigerian fraud scheme. Basically, even though they had been warned ahead of time that there were going to be some issues with how they were kicking out cash or sending out these employment checks, unfortunately, that nobody listened at this department, and it turned out to be kind of a fiasco. One of the things that was pointed out by various newspaper articles was that there was an inadequate security features, that they had in fact actually been disabled by insiders, employees at the Employment Security Department, under basically Levine's watch. And the amount changed between $1 billion to $600 million. The truth is nobody actually knows how much money was lost for sure at this point in time. And they're currently under a fairly significant audit. And this really made a lot of news because a lot of people who depended on unemployment, they willingly couldn't work. It was against their will, and so they were willing to do that under the promise that the state was going to come through with the unemployment checks. And for tens of thousands of people, that didn't happen for many, many months. Even some people eventually got it down the road. They had to go for many months without any income at all. For those even who did get income, they are still untangling to this day. Lots of problems related to identity theft and all kinds of other issues that came out of this Nigerian fraud scheme, and nobody's been held accountable yet at the department. And this has also been a problem and has been raised by many observers of government because even in government, even in Washington State, there should be some level of accountability for egregious incompetence. And nobody can doubt or dispute the fact that this was an example of stellar and spectacular incompetence. And so people have called for Governor Inslee, to fire Suzi Levine, or at least hold somebody there accountable. But that's not been the case. And it's led to other articles. I wrote this article a little while ago about when you basically hire people who are totally unqualified and not serious about running government or not serious about their job, eventually you will turn government into a circus. And the Employment Security Department in Washington State State has been not just a clown show, but a big circus and something that the rest of the nation could laugh at. But it's not very funny if you're somebody who's depending on those unemployment checks, and most of those in particular were people who were on the lower income scale, or if you've had ID theft and you've been dealing for the last year with addressing the theft of your identification in the process of somebody else fraudulently collecting your unemployment. And of course, what they're doing is they're just going to kick all this cash, the cost of this expense, onto the taxpayers in the future. Or in this case, they're also going to be taking this loss of at least $600 million. Again, we really don't know how much it is. It's not been clear how much money was lost, but they're going to be taking that and they're going to be kicking it on the backs of small businesses in the future and just increasing their insurance costs, further making it more difficult to hire people in the future, making it more costly to run a business. And in the end, this $600 million that was lost by Suzi Levine and under her stellar leadership at the Employment Security Department is there's really nobody held accountable for it. It just vanishes. And that's a lot of money. I mean, when we talk about money in government, we talk about billions of dollars wasted here or hundreds of millions of dollars wasted there, and the number becomes so big that it's hard to relate it to anything real. And yet, if you look at that, the average income of somebody in Washington State is actually around $36,000. That's 2019 data, but it's about that. That's about what, according to the Office of Financial Management, that's the average income of somebody in Washington State. And so, if you were making that much money, just the average income of Washington State, and you were trying to pay a $600 million bill, that would take you 16,667 years to actually earn enough money if the government took every penny of it for you to pay this disaster off, to pay the cost of what just happened in the Employment Security Department. But of course, nobody's being held accountable for this. I mean, there's just no level of accountability at all. And this is even after the Washington State Auditor's Office has come out and warned the unemployment agency to stop interfering with their audit into this massive fraud program. This is just from a couple months ago in late November. This article came out in the Seattle Times, and it's led many people to wonder, what's going on there? I mean, exactly what are they trying to cover up? What are they trying to hide from the public? Is anybody going to have any level of accountability? And despite all of this, the answer to that question is no, there's not going to be any accountability. And this is really disturbing in particular because the Washington State Auditor is not known, especially under the current regime, under the McCarthy regime that's going on there right now. They're not known for doing an aggressive job digging into government waste, particularly at a state level. For the most part, they approach most of these audits as a see no evil, hear no evil, let's find no evil, and let's find a way to justify whatever evil we do find. And so for them to even come out and point out some of these issues really highlights some of these problems. And it gets back to what the core topic of this, with that as kind of the background, what we're really going to be talking about today, which is the failing up and the government success story, at least for Suzi Levine in this case. And that is that nothing speaks success more than the leadership that she has demonstrated at the Employment Security Department. So apparently this drew the attention of the Biden administration back in the other Washington, in Washington, D.C., and they decided that this is exactly who they want to hire to bring into their administration. Now, at this point in time, it's not exactly clear what she's going to do, but it does help highlight that failure, especially in the government bureaucracy, is absolutely the highway to success. And that is proven once again by the Biden administration and their objective of recruiting and bringing in somebody from Washington State who was pretty much hands down one of the worst administrators that anybody's ever been in any of the Washington State agencies. And that's who they're going to come to run departments in Washington, D.C. Because after all, nothing says success more than losing $600 million to a Nigerian fraud scheme. I don't know what she learned in doing that. I don't know what valuable skills she's going to bring back to D.C. that this element of her resume is going to help contribute, but maybe we should try to look at that. According to the Biden administration, perhaps losing $600 million to a fraud, despite being warned about it ahead of time, that's a key feature because even though some insiders turned off security, the security features, making the fraud easy, nobody was ever held accountable. And this, despite interfering with the audit and trying to prevent the audit from uncovering anything, again, nobody is held accountable. And perhaps it's this set of skills that the Biden administration needs in the federal government to do it on a much bigger scale. You know, if you want to have a varsity squad operation going on in D.C., you come and get JV people like this from the hinterlands, like Washington State apparently is, and bring them back to D.C. and they can show them how it's really done. So let's put these guys in charge of government. I'm sure that nothing can go wrong. And the one thing to remember about bureaucracy in particular is that incompetence is a feature, not a bug, of government bureaucracy. Bureaucracy exists primarily to perpetuate itself. And the value of incompetence is that a mountain of corruption can easily be concealed by an ocean of incompetence. And it's very difficult, if you've ever dug into trying to figure out corruption in government or looked into these cases where there were corruption going on, oftentimes it's very hard to find and distinguish the corruption from incompetence. And because incompetence is such a feature set of government and the modern bureaucracy, it's very hard to find out what's actually corrupt. Most of us would recognize this as corruption, or the behavior that we see on a regular basis in most government bureaucracies, as some type of corruption, but they're able to write it off as incompetence, and incompetence is never punished. It's usually rewarded, as it was in this case. So the question is, what can you do as an activist who cares about liberty and freedom? And I would suggest that one of the things that we do beyond this obsession of the political process and the fight between Democrats and Republicans is to look at the largest party in government, which is the party of bureaucracy, with a B. Just remember, for a bloated B for just bureaucracy. And not just the politicians out there, regardless of whatever political label they might have. When we have less government involvement or interference in our daily life, it makes for a better government. And this is one of the problems that we see when government gets so big and so unaccountable. It makes for a worse government. A big government does tend to make worse government. It is one of those things that we see on a regular basis. And when you have government, especially the federal government, the main government for America, that they're recruiting the worst people they can possibly find in the country to run or be involved in the new administration and running these new federal agencies, the people who have lost the most amount of money but been able to cover it up, it doesn't bode well for how the federal bureaucracy is going to be operating in the future. And unfortunately, using failure, spectacular failure like this, as a resume criteria to be moved up higher in government, that doesn't give most of us a lot of comfort with how government's going to be run in the future. Government that governs less, government that's smaller, tends to help people have more control over not just themselves and their money, but their lives. And frankly, government runs a lot better when it's just involved in a lot fewer things. We do need better people running government. We need people with at least a modicum level, just a minor entry-level skill set that they can avoid losing hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not too much to ask. And it might be too much to ask right now, but I think we need to keep asking that there's some level of competency exists in government. Otherwise, failing up is going to be the dominant way that we seem to be running government today. So with that, we'll look around at other agencies, and I encourage you to look where you live and see where failing up is a standard feature of government. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see here and you want to learn more, go to wethegovern.com. Don't forget to subscribe on my website. Also, don't forget to subscribe down below on YouTube. And remember to share this with others. I've been banned on some social media platforms, and so sometimes sharing it's the only way to get the word out there. And if you think I missed something or you have other things that you've observed in your local bureaucracy, please make sure you add those comments below. I do read them all, and I try to respond to as many as possible. And remember, for those of you who care about government and our future, the future absolutely does belong to those who show up.